welcome to Epic Every Day, our weekday podcast for busy, overwhelmed Christians who want to get into freedom and abundance and peace. I'm Liz Frerichs, and this is my husband, Evan.
Hello.
And we are so glad that you guys are here with us on this lovely Tuesday. So this week, as you guys know, we are continuing to work our way through the CSCs. The CSCs are being calm, surrendered, centered, connected, and complete. And last week we spent the whole week talking about being connected. This week we are spending the whole week talking about being complete, especially reasons why we're not complete.
Yeah, the barriers, what gets in our way from that. And today we're going to talk about the big barrier of addiction, getting in the way of our completeness.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because addiction is both a barrier, like it's a symptom and a cause at the same time.
What's an addiction? That usually put me on the spot. Get me to define the barrier.
Well, so an addiction is basically anything you can't stop doing. Anything that I would argue it's anything that you use to handle problems, like an unhealthy coping mechanism that you can't stop doing. So
right.
Some people use, alcohol or drugs, and the church is very good at calling those kinds of things out. We're less good at calling out like food addictions, whether that's, overeating or undereating, or exercise addictions, or TV addictions, or phone game addictions, or
what are some others? They can, or work
oh yeah,
addicted
work
to work,
is a big one.
Smoking. Or television. Even we're like, oh, television, you shouldn't watch too much of it, but acknowledging the addictive power of it,
right?
Or even I think we
really any media.
Yeah. Smoking is like, well, everybody knows it's bad for you and that it's addictive. It doesn't really matter what it is.
Yes. Yeah, they're all kind of the same thing. It's all that. I like to talk about addiction as a fire, which if you guys have been listening for a while, you would have heard that before. And you'll probably hear it again. But
because you like to define it that way.
Yes, because I just really love that analogy that, you have these... The addiction is the actual fire. It's the flames, the things that you can see that are obvious. And it's obvious to you, even if it's not, well, most of the time it's obvious to you, even if it's not obvious to other people.
Sometimes.
But as soon as you stop trying to do it, it's really obvious.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then there's some kind of inciting event, and that's like the tinder. And then underneath all that are the coals. And that's the baggage, the stress that we're carrying from day to day. And what's really causing the addiction is that underlying stress baggage stuff.
It's the undealt with emotional stuff, I think. Is that what you would say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you defined addiction well. I would have, let's see, when I wrote it down, it was just worded slightly differently. Anything that helps you deal with it, whatever it is, it could be anything. And you're not really dealing with it. You're just doing the addiction to take the edge off of. And so it's probably, for me, anyway, in my experience, and a lot of people I've talked to, it's some emotion I'm seeing as negative and I don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
Or, any kind of stress. Maybe there's some external pressure too. And so taking the edge off of that is, you're not really doing anything about the stressor, but you're taking the edge off somehow.
Yeah, I was thinking about how, tomorrow we're going to talk about time and how part of being complete is really being in the present.
Yeah.
But I feel like addiction lives so aggressively in the present, in the now. Like addiction never cares about what happens tomorrow, 5 minutes from now,
Or sometimes the past, like truths we know that we've learned in the past, especially as Christians, like, the grace of God is sustaining me and I'm really okay. Right. God accepts me. Like none of that matters. It's like, how am I going to feel better? I don't know what to do.
Second.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. Mm-hmm. Like there's no consequences. It doesn't matter. You're just, who cares if you worked 80 hours this week? Who cares if you played your phone games for 15 hours this week? Like, doesn't matter.
Yeah. And at the end of it, it doesn't actually do the thing it's supposed to do.
Exactly.
Like the edge is not, like you said, it's maybe the uncomfortableness of whatever the thing is diminished in those moments.
Yeah.
But then as soon as you get sober again, or you shut off your phone, or the TV show's over, or the meal's over, it's back to,
Right.
I feel icky again.
That's actually one of the ways how I tell how I'm using. Like for me, I tend to have a media addiction. Like I tend to read when I'm stressed, and that takes the edge off. But I also tend to read as a downtime thing. And so
Sure.
I can tell by how I feel afterwards whether I was using it as like an addiction, trying to escape kind of thing, or a I'm taking downtime because afterwards, if it's a downtime thing, I actually feel encouraged, and I push more into my life because I'm like, yes, this
Yeah.
is, especially we've talked before on here about redemptive themes in literature, but there are
Oh,
so
yeah.
many different things that I read where every time I read them, I go, oh my goodness, that I so want to go out and do that in my life. Like I want to be that person. I want to grow through whatever this is. And so if I'm using my reading as downtime, that's totally my response afterwards.
Yeah. That's a great point, because a lot of these things, and I think what we're passionate about is helping people see, like, it's tricky because eating a meal, like, you're going to do that a few
Right.
times a day. You just got to. So is it an addiction thing, or is it not? Or, you know, exercising, or watching sports, or playing sports, or working out, like, these things can all be just fine. And
Right.
it, yeah, but yeah, what's going on underneath the why? That's a
Exactly.
good test. Like, how do I feel after? I guess
Mm-hmm.
am I a little bit more refreshed and energized and calmer? Like, am I look at the CSCs? Like, am I any more of those things at the end of this, or am I right back into whatever
Right.
the frantic was?
Well, and I feel like the frantic gets worse afterwards
Yeah.
if you're using something as an addiction. Like you come back into your life, and it's just so jarring to have to
Well,
deal with it, and nothing's any
right.
better.
It's
And
like,
so,
I just spent a week doing this, and now I'm a week behind dealing with the problem.
right, exactly. Yeah, and the problem just gets harder and harder to solve the longer you put it off.
Some of the trigger emotions, I would say, would be, well, we're talking about completeness, I think, and that's why we're talking about that today, is the driving thing that pushes me towards an addiction anyway is a big sense of incomplete or inadequacy. Like, I'm just not equipped to deal with whatever this is. So here's something I know how to do. I'm going to go eat a pizza. I know how to do that.
Yeah.
So that's the root problem, I think. I mean, what would you boil it down to? It's a sense of disconnection from reality and incompleteness, right? We're not fully engaged with
Yeah.
God and others, and so we're just kind of like, well, pizza solves that problem. A six pack of will solve that problem.
Yeah. Well, and for me, at least, in my experience, the goals are usually past things that you haven't dealt with.
Sure.
So there may be something that triggers that same emotion, but really the problem is,
Mm.
that's your molehill
Uh,
underneath, or maybe the tip of your iceberg, whatever you want to call it. And underneath that is this huge, thing from your childhood, thing from last week, who knows,
oh yeah.
something that didn't get dealt with that is then, tapping into that emotion. Kind of like drilling an oil well. You might have that same emotion, but really what you're tapping into is something that's been buried for a while.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Or something that's so learned, but yes, comes back to the same thing. Like, some trauma probably, or something that impacted us so significantly that we didn't know how to deal with, which is how you define trauma, I guess.
Yes.
And then, yeah, a thing, the addiction thing seemed to help, and so then for the rest of your life, then that's the solution to that problem, not actually
Right.
dealing with it.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because addiction is both, like I was saying at the beginning, it's both a symptom and a cause. Because it's a symptom of not being complete and having, all these fragmented parts of yourself that you've been ignoring. But then at the same time, it causes us to then be more fragmented in the future.
Yeah.
Like it prevents us from dealing with those things, kind of like, sticking a band aid on something that needs sewn up. You're like, yep, I check it off. I fixed the problem, but really, clearly you didn't,
So we should get back into how do we fix the incompleteness, or what do we do? If we can identify it, now what, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think start by identifying, do you have any addictions? And then, for me, I am such a huge proponent of EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping. It has changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, I will freely admit that some of that was doing other therapies beforehand that allowed me then to be able to take advantage of EFT, but I love EFT because it's free, it's easy, it doesn't take very long, and you can do it at home by yourself.
Yeah. And what is it doing? It's getting back to, it's called emotional freedom, right? Because it's, for instance, you'll deal with a thing like I dropped my ice cream cone and all my people I thought were my friends laughed at me.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that seems like it's just a kid thing, right? But maybe that impacted you greatly, you just being you generally, right?
Right.
But maybe that got you addicted to ice cream, or so that you never ate sweets again, or because who knows what the results would be. But then doing EFT on those memories is a way to kind of unlock it and process it. Whereas,
Right.
as that little kid, how are you going to know how to process that really? Unless, you could go to a trusted adult. Or, you could process. Kids can process stuff like that, but they need help.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
But if they don't have help, then it's going to get locked in there and turn into one of those embers that can just flame up when there's kindling placed on there.
Exactly. So, I mean, you can do stuff like try to avoid putting any kindling in your life, but something's going to come up
Yeah.
somewhere. So it's much more efficient to just start dealing with whatever the embers are.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the ways I've found most helpful is just being honest in front of other people, and that's what support groups are for, and
Yeah.
therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Telling, because a lot of it has to do with fear, I think, for most people. I'm speaking from my experience anyway, of like being known for real is scary for some reason. It's like, well,
yeah.
if I let somebody know that I'm not sure if I'm doing very good at this whole dad thing, like, I can't tell anybody that, right? But you find a place where you can tell somebody that, and you're accepted, and then there's a conversation that happens, and there's mutual respect and grace still. That's kind
Right.
of stuff's really healing.
Yeah, and that's part of de-traumatizing trauma,
Yeah.
is having somebody be there with you in the middle of it and still love you and
Yeah.
still accept you.
Well, and in those kind of environments too, it's not, so the thing you say that it is, like, if it is like, oh, I feel like I'm being a bad dad, like that's the top thing. And in the group, you can get on down to
Right.
some
Why
more
do you
deeper
feel like
stuff.
you're being a bad dad? Maybe
Right.
you are being a bad dad.
Sure.
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it maybe doesn't have anything to do with fatherhood. It could just have to do with something that happened between me and a friend when I was 10 or something.
Right.
Whatever it is.
Or maybe I have a totally screwed up view of what being a good dad is.
Oh, sure. Right. Some unrealistic expectations, and
Right.
we can't sort that stuff out on our own. I mean, otherwise we would, right? But we don't.
Yeah.
And we are just kind of drifting when we try to do it. In an environment like that, because those people, when they accept me and are still my friends at the end of the deep dark secret revealing, that's a tangible example of the grace of God, just being like, okay,
Yeah.
thanks for telling me I'm still here, and then that can reinforce our faith.
I think the first step really is just recognizing it,
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that it really is just the flame. So, I think in Christian society, we are so prone to quick put out the flames, like get rid of your addictive
Control
behavior,
the behavior.
right?
Yeah.
Without recognizing, okay, we really got to deal with what's underneath.
Yeah, and it takes time, I think,
Yeah.
is another big one. It's EFT takes time, support groups take time, and it's scary because you feel like you get on that train and you'll probably never get off, and in a way you never do. But it's also, that train takes you where you want to go. It takes
Yeah.
you to a very fulfilling place.
Yes. Yeah, and it's not like, at least in my experience, when I started dealing with my addiction stuff, it's not like that was a big part of what was happening in my life at the time, but it gradually became something that I only thought of occasionally, you know, versus something that's going on like every single day, you know?
Yeah, that's right. Because if we are actually healing those things and putting out those embers, then our life's
we
going
don't
to
have
be
to
more.
be afraid of stress.
Yeah, I mean, and there's still going to be stress, and there's still.
Right, but you learn healthy coping mechanisms so you don't have to turn to addiction.
That's right.
You learn to be like, wait a minute, I'm not calm. How do I get to be calm? How do I surrender? How do I be centered again? Well, we're so glad you guys were here today. Come back tomorrow. We're going to talk about being in the present, you know, time compartmentalization. And then Thursday, we're going to talk about denial or
boredom, I think, right? If you're bored and disconnected.
Not caring.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about some practical steps to being complete. We love you guys and we're praying for you. Remember, 1% improvement. So maybe start by seeing if you do have any addictions. You know, is there anything that once you do it afterwards, you feel worse than you did before you did it?
Yeah. I mean, we mentioned lots of things to try on the show, and it's not that you've got to try them all. If one kind of resonates with you, just focus on that.
Totally.
And thank you for sharing the show and talking about it with your friends. If it's been helpful to you and you think you've got a friend that would benefit from it, that's what we're trying to do, is trying to help the body of Christ to think about some of these things that we feel are very important.
All right, we'll talk to you guys later.
So long.